Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fanfiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Once the meeting was over, Ainz and his group waited for the Queen just outside the main gate by their carriage as they said they would. He didn't know how long it would take, but given that they had agreed on an hour, and the walk back here took some time itself, it shouldn't be too long of a wait. Though they could have easily teleported to the gate, that would leave them with even more idle time where they stood doing nothing. They could also use the time they spent walking to give a more thorough inspection of the city and see if they had missed something on their first walkthrough. Though nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary besides the occasional apartment complex from earlier. Thus they were left in the position that they were in now, standing by the carriage awaiting the arrival of Draudulin. Since they now had more freedom to discuss their findings as they were now out of range from anyone nearby to hear, they had spent the time getting each other's opinions, though now that they had completed that with no definitive conclusion, the well of conversation had suddenly dried up. Ainz did not wish to simply wait in silence until she showed up, however, and nor did his friends for that matter, and they began to quickly think of topics to keep the talk going. Though he found none, Ainz did suddenly remember a question he had been meaning to ask. Peroroncino-san, earlier when we were discussing the Dragon Kingdom's assistance, you suddenly jumped in to assist them. Not that I mind, of course, but may I ask your motivation to such a decision? Isn't it obvious, Momonga-san? He said this with a very flirtatious tone of voice while making a gesture of reaching out his hand. I would assume it's to help Touch-san, but I felt like we should have looked at the merits and demerits to helping them first. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and thus I wanted to see what they could offer before coming to a decision. We could have just as easily found out the answers through force if the beastmen held more value. This was only natural. One could not expect help without offering anything in return. If one side held more value, then the other would be at their mercy. Peroroncino's face, however, looked like he believed that Ainz was not understanding, and therefore, enlightened him. There's plenty of merit, Momonga-san, she's a legal lowly. Not only that, but she acts like a laid-back adult woman. Do you know what that means? My dream of having young girls that are actually hundreds of years old has finally come to fruition. That's merit enough, right? This spiel was being told to Ainz while he was being shaken by the shoulders from his sheer excitement. I think only you would be excited about this, Peroroncino-san. I would need more tangible benefits to be persuaded. Ha! I thought you couldn't stoop any lower, little bro, but it seems I was wrong. I would almost be impressed if it weren't so sad. Peroroncino merely spun from Ainz to Chagama at this remark with a counter-argument in tow. How can you say that, One-ichan? Not only is she a real person, but she is also of a legal age. I don't see a issue here. If you can give me a reason why it's a problem, then please inform me. If you sexually harass a queen, we're kicking you out of Nazarick. Her normally cute voice didn't carry a shred of mercy in it as it shifted back to her normal deep tone. Hey, that's a bit far, isn't it, One-ichan? Momonga-san, you wouldn't let her do that, right? His response was less of a question and more of a plead. Well, I'd rather not let it come to that point, Peroroncino-san. He turned his head way to hide his uncertain expression, though naturally his face did not change. I've been betrayed. Seeing he was defeated, he simply sagged his shoulders at his loss. Bro, you can handle it. Momonga-san has been in Nazarick for years, and he respected everyone's wishes of not doing anything to them. So shut up, and keep your libido in check. Momonga-san is completely different. It's not fair to compare the two of us. You're right. It really isn't. Gay, well. Realizing he had backed himself into a corner, Peroroncino could only make desperate sounds as he scrambled to find a retort to no avail. Alright, I think we've poked fun at him for long enough, Chagama-san. I think we should at least focus on what we will be doing once the Queen arrives here. Very well, though won't it be a simple carriage ride to the city, then save everyone there? I don't think too much thought needs to go into this. Unless you're talking about how we are going to deal with them, though she did have a point, Ainz would never enter a large-scale fight without a plan. Even if they vastly outclassed their opponents, a backup plan was certainly needed for these instances. I would have to disagree, Chagama-san. If the golems are more powerful than we think, then we might need to actually form a plan. Right now I've contacted Sheltir to have Gargantua on standby in case we require his abilities, but if the golems really aren't that impressive, then we could just leave it to him. That's a good idea, but what if the golems are as powerful as him? What then? If the opposition really had the equivalent of 4 Gargantuas, then even Ainz would have trouble defeating them. I'd find it hard to imagine the surrounding nations would be able to survive with such a force hiding under their noses, but if that is the case, we can use Gargantua as a way to quickly escape, then wipe out all of the beastmen with an area of effect spell, and find a way to take them for ourselves. If the chance presented itself, Ainz could use a cash shop item to cast IA Shub Nigurath instantly, and depending on the number of enemies, the Dark Young could hold off the golems while they watch from a safe distance. Of course, retreat was still the first option if there might prove to be too much. That could work, but then we would need to know the number of beastmen we're facing, as well as have access to such spells. Pero Roncino could take a lot of them out from a distance, but he is more suited to face individuals than armies, and Momonga-san's super tier magic would need time or a cash shop item to effectively work, so retreating may be the best option in that case. Well, what other options are there? I made it. As the group dived into another round of introspection, a shout came from the gate's entrance, and at its source was a small girl accompanied by 2 guardsmen. Unlike her previous attire, this outfit seemed to be made for travel, as it was thick clothing that was lined with leather for defense. I deeply apologize for having your majesty wait for me. It took some time to get prepared for the journey. Be at ease, there is nothing to apologize for. Being prepared is an essential quality for anyone heading into the unknown. Ainz could not necessarily fault her for this, as back in Yggdrasil, he would also take a very long time deciding what the best gear to wear in a new environment or to a fight, thus he couldn't say anything with his companions in tow. Plus she was still here by the designated meeting time, thus there was nothing to be upset over. Yeah, it's completely fine. It's only natural to take considerations in travel gear. There is nothing to worry about. Buku Buku Chagama simply gave the reply in a sing-song voice while waving a tentacle in her direction as if to say, "Don't worry about it." Thank you, Your Majesty, and you as well. I just realized that I haven't gotten your name yet. You're right. My name is Buku Buku Chagama, but you can call me Chagama-san. I'm sorry, I have yet to understand your standing in the Sorcerer Kingdom, but if you are equals to the Sorcerer King, should I not refer to you as Chagama-sama? It's fine, though we are equals in terms of power, we're just friends of Momonga-san, so you can call me whatever you wish. Though she had no real facial expressions to speak of, it was apparent based on her positive voice that she was smiling. Then thank you, Chagama-san. Honestly, I wish I had your voice. If I could sound that cute, I would be able to attract an even greater number of people to my side in debates. Yep, it's one of my specialties. Maybe I'll teach you how to improve your voice acting later. I am most grateful. Then, Your Majesty, it should be at least an 8-hour journey to get there by carriage, so I assume we are departing in yours, Your Majesty? Indeed, is that a problem? Not at all, I was just making sure. Alright then. Seeing as my undead do not require food or rest, we should be able to reach it in less time than normal. Maybe in 6 to 7 hours if we're lucky. Since his runecraft scheme had fallen through for now, he had decided to simply try pitching his undead's merits until new progress with the field was discovered. Instead of beating a dead horse, he would sell it. That would certainly be of assistance. Based on our reports, the army will reach the city by today or tomorrow, so every second counts towards saving my people. Your Majesty, I'm in your capable hands. Then let us be off. And so they entered the carriage, in hopes of reaching the last standing city of the Dragon Kingdom in time. HM? Who would be coming here at this time? What is it, One-Ichan? As one of the guardians of the 6th floor, Aura was tasked with keeping track of all who entered and exited the underground forest. Though all of Nazarick was celebrating the return of two of the supreme beings, that was no reason to become lax. If anything, it meant they needed to work harder so they others may return to them one day. Mayor, it seems someone entered the 6th floor from the 5th floor entrance. Do you think it could be an intruder? Don't be ridiculous. That's impossible. An intruder could not have possibly made it this far into the Great Tomb. Since only one reaction was sent, it would seem only one person had entered. Not only would it be impossible for an individual to have made it this far into Nazarick, but they would also need to have passed the other guardians to do so. In a sense, Mayor's words were doubting the abilities of the Supreme Ones, as well as their fellow guardians' skills. It would not be out of line to say those words could be taken as an affront to Nazarick as a whole. She had thought of scolding her brother for saying such things, but understood that this was his personality and simply settled with an icy glare. I am not saying that it is, of course. I was just wondering. His voice trailed off, seemingly losing what little power it had. Well, it's not. Since there was only one reaction, it's probably one of the other guardians coming here for some reason or another. I'll go meet them by the gate. Unnecessary Arinsu on a gate had opened next to the Dark Elf twins, and from it stood a world-class beauty known as Shaltir Bloodfallen. Though one would commonly find her expression to be a smile of haughty superiority, or a sadistic grin to her lessers, today she wore a large smile that could not be mistaken for anything other than happiness. It looked like it would belong to an innocent girl on a summer's day, and Aura could not help but feel weirded out by the difference to her normal self. Shaltir? What are you doing here? Did Ainz-sama send you, or are you here for personal business? Being sent on a personal mission from Ainz was any guardian's dream, thus it was the only explanation Aura could think of for this odd expression she wore. Nothing like that. I simply came to inform you that Pararansino-sama has returned. She practically twirled in place as she gave her cheerful reply. Really? So soon? Now it was obvious why she wore such an expression. Both Aura and Mare would do the same if their beloved creator had returned to them. Indeed. It's not due to the wonderful work I have done for Ainz-sama. I was so worried that due to my past failure, he may never see me as adequate to grace me with his presence. But I was wrong. He is truly here at last. See, congratulations, Shaltir. I'm happy for you that your creator decided to come back. I hope Buku Chagama-sama comes back to us as well. Aura naturally agreed with this as well. In fact, everyone in the Great Tomb would naturally want the one who created them to come back to them as soon as possible. No one would dare think otherwise. Oh yes, it seems that Buku Chagama-sama came back with him as well. Did I forget to mention that? Her face was the very picture of confusion, as if to say, was it something I said? Silence. The entire room went silent in the face of this news. The expressions the twins had on their face froze completely still without changing in the slightest. Then the uproar that came from the two quickly shattered the quiet. Are you kidding me? I am mad to Shaltir. Why didn't you say that sooner? Though not as explosive as Aura's shout, it still carried the same anger within it that was completely parallel from Mare's usual character. Oh come now, I was just having some fun with you too. No need to work yourselves up into a tizzy. Though they clearly had more to say to her, the excitement of their creator's return overrid that, and they threw away the argument for the sake of seeing her sooner. Then where is she now? Don't toy with us this time, Shaltir, or you will regret it. The agitation in her tone was obvious, and they clearly would not let another joke go by so easily. Unfortunately, Buku Chagama-sama and Pararansino-sama have gone with Ainz-sama to the Dragon Kingdom to assist Touch-me-sama with some unknown task. I don't know when they'll be back, but it shouldn't be too long since all three of them are going. She's already gone. The sadness was evident within her voice, to say nothing of her expression. For the first time, Shaltir's elation seemed to drop slightly as she moaned softly. I understand, Aura. I myself only got to see Pararansino-sama once when I sighted him at the dwarven drop-off point, but he soon fainted upon seeing me, that we had to bring him back to Nazarick before I could say anything. He probably did so out of happiness, as I almost did myself, but still. Then can't we go out and assist them? It would only be natural to assist one's creator out on the field. It certainly wasn't an excuse to see her sooner. Of course not. Can't. We are currently under orders to stay within Nazarick until they arrive. So until they get back, I have just been tidying myself and my room up so I can meet him properly once he comes back. The gloom that had been cast over the twins vanished in an instant as it was replaced by determination. You're right, Shaltir. That might be the most sense you've ever made. It was true that one needed to be immaculate before one's god. Anything less would be a complete embarrassment. Therefore, they would need to clean the entire living area of the giant tree before letting Buku Buku Chagama see it. Ha! Come on, Mare, let's hurry. Right. See coming. Ignoring the incredulous sound made from Shaltir, the two sprinted off at top speed to prepare themselves for Buku Buku Chagama's eventual visit. An army of 20,000 surrounded the city of Ard, the last city of the Dragon Kingdom, to give one last line of defense before the capital. A number of 20,000 soldiers was quite small in the grand scheme of things. It would be acceptable for small skirmish between nations, but not a last stand for an all-out war. And when the army they faced was 50,000 strong, their odds were not great to say the least. The reason for this lack of manpower was simple. Most able-bodied fighters were ordered back to the capital to bolster their ranks to fend off the onslaught of creatures heading their way. There was quality in quantity after all. While this alone did not fare well for them, the situation was rather grim in another aspect. Humans were a weak species, and thus required numbers to overcome odds that were unfavorable to them. If a giant beast came, one would naturally need to rely on one's allies to work together and take it out. However, what if the army they were facing did not only have quantity, but the army itself was made up of quality? The answer was simple. They would die. The army they were currently facing comprised of the menace known as beastmen. A type of demi-human that took more from the animal side than they did the human one. They were vicious and very rarely willing to converse with humans. Though there were some that would forge friendly relationships with humans, these were few and far between. Most would rather devour all in their path. And each one had the power to do so. Wolfmen, though they were the most common type of beastmen, they were still extremely deadly. Possessing razor-sharp claws and frightening speed and senses, even a silver-ranked adventurer would be hard-pressed to defeat one. Though they shared common traits with the well-known werewolf, they are significantly weaker than their larger cousins. Birdmen, though commonly mistaken for the heteromorphic being known as a birdman, they were significantly more common than the latter. They possessed the weakest physical ability out of the beastmen, but that was still more than enough to carry a fully grown human. Each one of their arms possessed feathered wings that extended from the wrist to the hip. While they still had hand at the ends of their arms, their legs were more developed so they could fight in the sky. 8 beastmen, easily possessing the most muscle of any other member of their race, they primarily acted as the brawn of their race's wars. They also were said to possess the most intelligence, as they shared the most ancestry with man. A single one possessed enough arm strength to throw a small boulder with the force of a cannon up to 30 meters. Though this was only a small portion of the species that made up their ranks, it shows just how outmatched a human would be in a straight fight. The variety in their fold was quite large. However, the one thing that remained consistent was the strength they possessed. In adventuring terms, the average adult human is ranked as a 3 in terms of difficulty. For comparison, an adult beastman would rank at a 30. Therefore, a single beastman represented the strength of 10 of theirs. Of course, numbers weren't everything. One could not defeat a difficulty 90 creature, a level reserved for adamantite adventures, with 30 people. Oftentimes numbers meant they were more dangerous than what was implied. Even if they matched up correctly, that would mean at their best, they would only be able to kill 2,000 beastmen before they perished. The people who were about to give their lives knew this, but did not give voice to these despairingly bad odds. That was because if someone really did say it, they might lose what little courage they had scrounged up to fight here. They were the last line of defense before the beastmen reached their loved ones who had evacuated, so they could not give in to terror. They knew they would die, but they would not despair. The weaponry and the barricade around the city were meant to weaken and stall the beastmen rather than defeat them, so they had to cover as much time as could so they could prepare. So, they're finally here. One of the soldiers gave his thoughts to the one next to him as a method of calming his disturbed heart. At the horizon of the field in front of them, a wave of flesh proceeded to come ever closer, as if it was a looming specter of death. Everyone stationed here knew that the beastmen were coming, but it was still shocking to have to see it up close. It seems so. At least my wife and child aren't here. They ran to the capital like everyone else. The man seemed to fall into a period of contemplation. Though no one but him knew what he was thinking, the most likely option was he was thinking of seeing his family, or at least of them. Do we have any chance at victory? A victory for us is stalling them as long as we can. Defeating this number is utterly impossible. He did not take his eyes off the army as he made his reply, as he felt if he turned away from it at this moment, he may not be able to draw on the courage to look back. The other man gave a worried look towards him, but simply shook his head and faced the oncoming storm. Now was not the time to complain or fall into depression. The way the soldiers were placed was made to maximize the potential time they could save. 5,000 foot soldiers were placed on the ground to fend off the first wave of attackers, and the remaining 15,000 would be on top of the wall to use other siege tactics on them from afar. Not only do I want my family to be safe, but I also couldn't imagine the queen falling under the hands of the beastmen. Though no one here had ever met her, it was common knowledge that the queen of the Dragon Kingdom was a little girl. Though no one knew how it was possible that she could run a kingdom, it could simply be her dragon blood coming into play for that. She would often send letters of encouragement to those conscripted into the fighting. Anyone who read them would instantly feel their heart melt and want to protect her at all cost. Dear soldiers of the Dragon Kingdom, I can't thank you all enough for your hard work. I do really appreciate it, because otherwise we would all be captured and eaten. Don't give up hope. I believe in you. Drawdalin. The notes would always have misspellings and poor typography. If one didn't know who it was from, they may mistake it for drunken rambling. Though since it was from a child trying her best, it made everyone invigorated by invoking a protective desire in all of them. This fighting spirit was the only thing that could get them to face an army such as this. Therefore, the soldier knocked his bow as he gave voice to his thoughts, followed by the rest of the contingent. We won't let them reach the capital. The bows were loosed, sending a storm of arrows to the massive beast. Though this was a common strategy, due to the powerful hides and fur of most beastmen, the arrowheads didn't do much on the first volley. As the rain of arrows fell, most simply fell of their coats and clattered to the ground harmlessly. Very few managed to strike home, and the ones that did were not fatal, merely blinding them in one eye. This was not a reason to panic. They would simply have to release another volley to cause more damage. However, why are there so few birdmen in the air? Logically speaking, they would employ the entirety of their forces to assault the Dragon Kingdom to ensure they would win the war. That was just common sense. Then what could be the reason to hold off on deploying their air forces? Could it be they want to wait until the firing squad has been taken out? The soldier next to him attempted to answer his query, but there were still problems with the idea. It would certainly make sense from a tactical perspective, since their arrows would be the best method to take them down. But the reverse was also true. They had the easiest time reaching them on the barracks, so that was a major point of worry in their plans to stop them. They would have needed to be defeated first for them to pull it off successfully. 5 more rapid storms of arrows were directed at the beastmen, but at the end, it seemed only 1,000 of them could even be considered injured, and only 50 of them had actually fallen. However, they had already reached the front line, so any more would harm their own soldiers. So as the two armies clashed, sword to fang, they supported from the rear, attacking individuals to aid them. The physical abilities of the two was without contest. Even if a sword strike managed to strike home, it was likely that it wouldn't be enough to push through, and the soldier would be viciously torn apart, skin from flesh from bone. However, despite the support they were receiving from the archers, due to the overwhelming disparity, the 5,000 soldiers were slaughtered in less than 5 minutes, leaving only carnage in their place. Though this was bad, as they needed to hold off the enemy as long as possible, it was not the worst one possible, since the bulk of their tools were on the top of the wall, in order to slow them down. As soon as the human wall had been torn through, the wolfmen at the front sunk their claws into the stone wall, a feat proving the sharpness and muscle strength one possessed, and began to scale it to reach the top of the city and begin what would no doubt be a massacre. In the face of this, the army did not grow desperate, nor did they fall into panic, but simply stared at the ever-encroaching soldiers get larger and larger, until the entire wall was almost filled with the bodies of beastmen. Though it may seem as they had given up and waited for death, there was a reason for their inaction. And that reason soon became apparent within seconds. What the hell is GRAAAH? Get it off me. They had been given orders to wait until the last possible second in order to pour boiling oil and tar on the sides of the walls to get as many beastmen as possible. Though this would be a massive waste of resources, and one would think to use boiling water instead, the Dragon Kingdom was not in a state to be worrying about saving resources. Not only that, but the oil would make the sides of the walls slick, which would make it much harder for them to climb it. The plan was to cause the beastmen to see they could no longer climb the walls, and would then storm the front gate all at once to break through into the city. However, that would only make it easier to pour things on them, since they would converge in one spot, that would then be stuck together with the tar. This method, if pulled off correctly, would make it extremely hard for the beastmen to actually get in the city, and would force them to halt their advance on the city to think of a way in. Seeing as the first phase had been pulled off without a hitch, the men's spirits began to rise, and as they saw the beastmen backing off to head towards the gate, they dared to hold the faint hope that they could win if luck was on their side. We might actually be able to win this. Do you think? He had turned to express his excitement to his comrade next to him so he could get another perspective, his breath caught in his throat. Where there had once been a man was now a red splotch on the floor. He turned his head to the direction of the city so he could attempt to understand what just happened, and nearly vomited when he did. Nor was it just him. The rest of the contingent nearly did the same as well, some not even able to do that much, which left the sickly stench of bile waft through the gore-ridden battlefield. Plastered to a watchtower by an arrow was the knight from before, but to call it a mere arrow would be understating it in the extreme. It would be more apt to call it a ballista bolt made from metal due to its size. Ballista bolts were made of wood for a variety of reasons. Not only due to the expense of making them from higher grade materials, but also because of the distance they could go. Using metal for such an ammunition type would be too heavy for one, and thus would cause it to clatter uselessly to the ground from its weight. So then what was this done by? Following the path taken from the hunk of metal would lead one's eyes to a terrifying sight. 8-meter-tall statues shaped like a centaur lined the horizon, each wielding a different weapon. However, they were not mere decoration. The best proof of this was the leftmost statue that was possessing a bow. It was moving its arms to show it had sentience, and was moving into position to shoot another arrow. Anyone could guess at this point what these creatures were. They were golems, constructs of magic and materials that would do the bidding of whoever ordered them. However, who could have predicted that they could be made to be this large? Even ordinary wood golems took more than a year to build. With perfect movements that would take any human years of mastery, another bolt was let loose from its quiver, and smashed only a few meters away from where he had been standing. As a result, the wall that had previously barricaded the city had been completely smashed, leaving a huge hole in its wake for the beastmen to pour into. Their previous work to stop their advance was erased in the blink of an eye. With the opportunity now available to them, they climbed the wall with ridiculous speed. Now that it was uneven, it could be climbed with ease. Even a human could climb up the wall as it was now. Damn it, he did the only thing he could do at that moment, and took what arrows he had left to try to stop their advance, but it was too late. The horde had already reached him, and 3 different creatures had lunged for his throat at the same time. And as if he needed anything else to be depressed about, out of the corner of his eye he could see the birdmen starting their advance as well. It was pointless, huh? With that pitiful last thought, he closed his eyes, and braced himself for death. Walls of Jericho. Before any of them reached him, however, a translucent, red barrier came into existence between him and the beastmen. Annoyed that their prey had slipped through their grasp at the last moment, they clawed and bit at the invisible wall, but to no avail. What the hell is this thing? He also shared the beastman's thoughts. Just what caused this barrier to appear? Nor was it just him. The entire army, which now was protected under the guise of this mysterious shield, could not help but think what had just saved their lives. They were so shocked that they didn't notice another metal arrow bounce right off it. As if to answer the beastmen, a cold voice rang forth. Don't worry about it. Triple maximize widen magic, fireball. 3 argent flames flew over his head from behind him, which then collided with the opposing force. The results were obvious, for as soon as contact was made, the balls of fire erupted into mighty pillars of incendiary glory, erasing all in their way. So quick was the conflict ended that people could not help but wonder how a life and death battle just occurred there moments prior. This power brought both terror and joy to those who witnessed it. To those on the brink of death, it seemed to be a godsend for their lives to be able to continue to see another day, but it also caused them fear at seeing such a mighty spell. Anything that they could muster could not hope to defeat such a force, and as they saw its source, their terror only deepened. This powerful flame had flown from a skeleton, draped in ropes black as night. As the nemesis of all things living, it caused everyone to believe they simply were going to die by the hand of someone else. Though it was not the only entity. Surrounding it were 3 others. An avian shrouded in gold, a slime that easily dwarfed a man in size, and a small girl who could not have been over the age of 10. No one had any idea what to make of this, as each one's appearance was so drastically different from one another, that nobody could think of a rational response to this. The words that were said next also threw them into another state of panic. Now then, shall we get started? Wonderful, it's all going according to plan. As the Beastman King watched from the sidelines as his armies advanced, he could not help but chuckle as everything so far had fit within his expectations. Humans were nothing, if not predictable, so he could accurately guess how they would handle being cornered like this. It was only natural they would try to stall them out rather than win, and as much as he hated to admit, that tactic was a problem. Most beastmen were fairly straightforward creatures, choosing to act on whatever they deigned to at the moment. Because of this, strategy was not something they often employed. Usually their physical bulk was enough to get the job done, and if this was a straight-on fight, it would. However, with so many of the opposition's fighters placed in a position to fight from a distance, they would have plenty of time to act on their movements. Though the archers would not do much to the cavalry, it could still cause injuries down the line which may impede their final objective. Though the birdman could easily handle them, he had his reasons for not deploying them just yet. Though the birdmen were excellent in mobility, they were somewhat lacking in other areas. It would not be out of the question for one to be downed by one well-placed arrow, so having them deal with the wall's denizens may cause more casualties than he would like. So he had them stand back for now. Though with all of these problems, there was still no issue as long as they had their secret weapon. Once the golems make their move, it will likely disorient them, then when everything falls into chaos, I'll have them join to pick off the remaining forces. From what he knew, the Dragonic Kingdom was not aware they had enlisted the golems into their ranks, since the cities were destroyed too fast for the news to spread, and if they did somehow know, it was already too late. Well, it should be about that time. Though he was a fair distance from the structure, he could make out something being spilled down the sides, which was causing his forces to disperse. He could see they had almost made it to the top, but their advance was cut short. Burning oil. Or is it tar? Either way, it was a clever tactic. Because of the heat, they would be forced to backpedal, no matter how strong the individual, and since the beastmen did not know magic, fire protection spells were not an option either. To make matters worse, since it had covered the wall they would have to climb, it was no longer an option to use when they tried to enter the city. Thus they would need to attack the main gate, which would be significantly harder. This might be troublesome, if we didn't have them. This tactic would cause them to be put on the back foot for a while, though with the power of the golems, it was child's play. Isham, let's give them some fear first. Alright, cavalry golem, aim one of your arrows at the lone archer on the wall. With the order given, the living statue began to move with robotic yet precise movements. Within 2 seconds, it had already knocked a massive arrow that was at least 2 meters long, and fired. The bolt sailed through the air at unbelievable speeds that freighted onlookers. Even the king would not be able to dodge as it was now. That being the case, what was the fate of the man it was aimed at? Naturally, he simply dyed his surroundings a deep red as his life was extinguished. Oh, how he cherished the looks of stupefaction on the surrounding people. It was something that never grew old, watching people who though they had a chance crumble in the face of reality. Now that I've had my fun, let's get on with it. Golem, fire another shot at the wall below him. Just like before, the arrow was set loose, and the force of it smashing into the stone wall opened up a large hole that they would easily be able to break into. As he witnessed his horde flow into the newly created opening, he could not help but smile. Though this was not the final attack, seeing how quickly a city crumbled before him gave him confidence, and merely reaffirmed his thoughts that humans were truly weak creatures. Yet despite the odds turning into their favor, his army stopped dead in their tracks. What is this? Their defenses are shattered and the army is routed. Is this not the time to break through? Seeing his victory fall short for no apparent reason caused his calm mood to fade as impatience fueled his anger. Fire another arrow at the wall. The hunk of metal sailed towards the man-made barricade, yet instead of the expected result of having a repeat of last time, he saw a flash of red, and it bolt fell uselessly to the ground. In the face of this, he could finally understand what had happened. A spell. Indeed, if that was the case, then it would make sense. Though he did not know much about magic, he could at least surmise that what was used was some sort of defensive spell, though exactly how powerful it was remained to be seen. Though it could block an attack from the golem's bow, it was not as if it could do that infinitely. Spells could only be so strong after all. As he was mulling over how to deal with this new situation, a massive plume of fire decimated a huge portion of their front line. Clearly, whatever this was, it needed to be dealt with. Come, golems. We should end this before it gets too far. With the capital still needing to be destroyed, they couldn't lose such numbers this quickly. Moving with perfect rhythm, the golems moved through the army carrying their king upon themselves. The beastmen knew what this meant, and merely stood aside for their leader to finish the skirmish.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.